I always thought betrayal would feel like a slap. Loud, hot, undeniable. Something you could scream at, throw things at, cry through. But when it happened to me, it arrived silently, tucked inside a flash drive no bigger than a key. And it didn't hit me all at once. It settled in slowly. Like fog. It started the night my best friend Aline knocked on my door with shaking hands and bloodshot eyes. She didn't speak. She just stood there, clutching her camera bag, until I let her in. Tea. I offered, because I didn't know what else to say. She nodded. Her voice had vanished. We sat on the couch like we had 100 times before, except this time, everything was different. There was something in the air, heavy and trembling. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small flash drive. "Before you watch this," she said hoarsely, "I want you to know I didn't plan to find it. I didn't even recognize him at first." I took the flash, but didn't move. I was shooting near the old tram tracks. You know how I love that place at night. The reflections, the quiet. I saw a couple. Thought they were interesting. The way they were holding each other. The way he kissed her hand like she was made of porcelain. I took a few photos. Just silhouettes at first. But then they walked into the light. My heart was already sinking. My fingers were trembling. "It was him," she whispered. I kept shooting. I don't know why. Maybe I needed proof. For you. For myself. But I followed them. They had coffee. They laughed. They kissed. And then they walked into a hotel. I didn't cry. Not yet. I simply stood, walked my laptop, and plugged in the flash drive. Aline sat behind me, silent. The folder was labeled Saturday /_11 p.m. Inside were 37 photos. Each one a knife. Him, my husband, with her. I didn't recognize her. Long coat, red lipstick, hand gripping his arm like she'd owned him forever. They were in the cafe he and I used to go to, the one where he first told me he loved me. They sat at our table. He ordered her my drink. I knew it from the cup design. I'd seen that same swirl 100 times. The photo that broke me was the one outside the hotel. He had his arm around her waist. She was laughing, and he looked young, free, like the version of him I hadn't seen in years. That night, after Aline left, I stared at my ceiling until morning. My body was still, but inside, everything was boiling. By dawn, I had a plan. I opened my laptop and went through every image again. I edited them, cropped, enhanced, clarified. I knew photography, thanks to Aline. I knew lighting, framing. I turned them into a series. For moments, for lies, for betrayals. I contacted an old colleague from my ad agency days, Natalie. She ran her own firm now. When I told her what I needed, she paused only for a moment. "Billboards?" she asked. "Yes. High-res. No watermarks. Anonymous number for payment. Locations? Cafe Verona. Hotel Astor. Crossroads by his office. And one more. Our street." There was silence. "You sure?" she said. "More than ever." It took 48 hours. The first billboard went up on Tuesday, right by the cafe. A black and white image. Him leaning across the table, brushing hair from her face. No words. Just raw, sharp reality. The second appeared by the hotel. Him holding the door for her. She was adjusting her scarf. His eyes were only on her. By Wednesday, the city buzzed. Strangers took pictures of the billboards, wondering if it was an art project, a campaign. No one knew the story. No one had to, except him. The third billboard faces office. He would see it every morning. A shot from the alley behind the hotel. Their silhouettes tangled in shadow. On Thursday morning, I heard the first voicemail. "Are you insane?" he shouted. "You're destroying my life." Click. I didn't call back. That afternoon, the final billboard went live. On our street, visible from our kitchen window. The photo I chose? The one where he kissed her cheek while she looked straight into the lens. Unaware. It was accidental. Beautiful. Damning. When he came home that night, suitcase in hand, face pale, I didn't open the door. I watched from the second floor as he stood there, staring up at the image of his own infidelity, a monument to his choices. And I smiled. He didn't try again after that night. Not for a few days. No calls. No texts. No desperate knocks at the door. Just a vacuum. A silence that hummed like static. I knew he had seen them all. The billboards. The photos. The carefully selected moments I'd chosen to display as truth to the city. But I hadn't done it for the drama. I hadn't done it out of cruelty. I did it because I needed him to feel what I felt. Powerless, exposed, helpless in the face of a reality you can't edit. On Friday morning, Aline returned. She brought coffee and sat on the edge of the kitchen counter, like always. But something had shifted between us, not in a bad way, in the way a soldier and medic might sit together after a war, silent, aware, bound by something that would never quite be spoken aloud. "Have you slept?" she asked. "Some." "And how do you feel?" Like I cracked open the sky and let everything out. She nodded, slowly. "Good. Then maybe now you can breathe again." I didn't know if she meant it metaphorically or not. All I knew was that breathing felt different now. Deeper. Real. Later that day, I took a walk. I hadn't walked through the city alone since before the flash drive, since before I knew what I knew. But I needed to see the world still turning. I needed to prove to myself that life hadn't stopped, even if my heart had. The billboards were still up. People were still talking. I overheard snippets. "Have you seen that series? Looks like a photojournalism project. Do you think it's about something real? Maybe it's an ad for a movie." I smiled to myself. Let them guess. That was the beauty of it. No names, no labels, just the truth in full view. At the corner of 8th and Main, I stopped. Across the street stood the billboard facing his office. And right there, walking out of the building, was him. He looked thinner, paler. He wasn't alone. A colleague walked beside him, speaking, gesturing. But his eyes weren't on the man or the sidewalk. They were on the billboard. I stepped back into the shadow of a doorway, hidden but watching. And for a moment, our eyes met. Across the street, across the fallout. He froze. I didn't. I turned and walked away. That night, he finally sent a message. Him. I deserved it. Every frame, every glare, every silence. Him. I don't expect forgiveness. But I do hope one day you'll find peace. I stared at the messages for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't reply. He had spoken, and that was enough. I didn't need his apologies. I didn't need his guilt. I needed something else. The next morning, I opened my laptop and started a new folder. I called it Reclaimed. Inside, I began collecting all the photos I loved that had nothing to do with him. My first art show, my dog in a raincoat, Aline asleep on a train with a book across her chest, the mountains from that solo trip I took before marriage, memories that belonged solely to me. Later that afternoon, Aline called. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "What?" "One of your billboards got reposted by a photography blog. They're calling it the Anonymous Wife series. It's blowing up. People are speculating. They think it's conceptual art. Some think it's fiction. Some say it's the rawest project they've seen in years." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "It was raw," I said, "and it was real. Do you want me to shut it down? They're trying to trace the photographer." I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "No, let it live." Because maybe the pain was personal, but the truth was universal. And now it had a voice. It's strange how quickly something personal becomes public. The city I once moved through invisibly now felt like it had eyes everywhere, watching, reading, speculating. Not about me, exactly, but about the story I'd made visible. People didn't know who I was. That was the beauty of anonymity. But they felt me. The grief, the betrayal, the fury in those black and white frames. My inbox started filling up, not just with strangers, but with editors, curators, journalists. Some wanted interviews. Some asked if there would be more. One even offered to feature the billboard images in an urban art exhibit. I ignored most of them. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about galleries. This wasn't art. It was therapy with edges. But one email stayed with me. Your pain has a pulse. I saw my own reflection in your silence. Thank you for speaking without words. I read it over and over, not because it flattered me, but because it reminded me that what happened to me wasn't rare. It was just rarely seen. Aline was the first to nudge me toward doing more with it. She came by with takeout, dropped her bag at the door, and said, "You know you've accidentally started a movement, right?" I rolled my eyes. Hardly. You showed people something they usually only feel in private. You gave it shape. Pain doesn't need a fan base. Maybe not, she said, but it deserves a witness. We sat on the floor, eating noodles and scrolling through comments on a reposted image. Some were full of sympathy. Others were angry men, mostly, calling it vindictive, manipulative, bitter. I didn't mind. They didn't know me. They didn't deserve to. By the end of the week, all 4 billboards were taken down. I had paid for only a few days, just long enough, but their impact remained. Photos circulated. Debates happened. Even a podcast episode featured the mystery. He never contacted me again. I think he understood. Instead, I found myself spending more time in the world again. I picked up my own camera for the first time in months. It felt foreign in my hands, like holding a version of myself I had buried. I started taking pictures again. Not of betrayal, not of sorrow, just life. A couple holding hands on the subway, a dog sleeping in a bookstore window, a woman with purple hair dancing on a sidewalk to music only she could hear. Every night, I uploaded them into a new folder, Recovery. One afternoon, Aline called me in a rush. "Check the feed," she said. "Your story made the national art column." It was surreal. There was Anonymous Wife series, when personal grief becomes urban myth. The article didn't guess who I was. It didn't even try. It honored the story as it was raw, human, unforgettable. That night, I stood on my balcony, watching the city I had once exposed, now exposing parts of itself to me. And I felt something I hadn't in months. Peace. Not closure. That's a myth. But peace. Because I no longer needed him to see me. The world already had. You don't expect the world to keep spinning after your world ends. But it does. The buses still roar down crowded streets. Coffee shops still filled with the smell of espresso and cheap perfume. Couples still argue about nothing in line at the pharmacy. And I was learning how to exist in it again. Not as his wife. Not as a woman betrayed. Just as me. The ripple effects of the billboards hadn't fully settled. Occasionally, I'd overhear someone mention the photos. Someone in a cafe. 2 teenagers passing on a sidewalk. One time, even a barista nodded at me with that slow, speculative look, not knowing, but maybe sensing. That sixth sense humans develop when they feel they've brushed past a story worth knowing. But I didn't shrink from it. I leaned into the silence that followed. Not the kind that feels like loneliness, but the kind that feels like freedom. I moved through my days deliberately. Long walks, solo breakfasts, window shopping without intention. I discovered a bookstore I'd never noticed before, tucked between a laundromat and a vintage record shop. I spent an hour there, flipping through photography books, tracing old film edges with my fingers. It reminded me that creation doesn't have to come from pain. It can also come from curiosity. Aline was busier now. Her photography had picked up traction, and she was preparing for a small exhibition of her own. I helped her design the layout, something I hadn't done since my early days in advertising. It was strange and wonderful to create something that wasn't about heartbreak. It was about beauty, intention, craft. We had dinner one evening on her balcony. The city buzzed below us, neon reflections blinking in wine glasses. "I'm proud of you," she said suddenly. "For what?" "For turning ashes into something that breathes. You didn't just survive. You spoke." I looked at her, my oldest friend, the one who had handed me the truth without filter or apology. "I couldn't have done any of it without you." "You could have," she smiled, "but I'm glad you didn't have to." After she left that night, I pulled out my camera again, not for a project, just because I took photos of the city from my fire escape, light trails from cars, the blur of a cyclist, the shimmer of a wet street under moonlight. And then I turned the camera on myself. I hadn't taken a self-portrait in over a year. At first, I hesitated, but then I set the timer, stepped into frame, and looked straight at the lens, not smiling, not faking strength, just present. The click echoed louder than I expected. I loaded the image onto my laptop later, staring at it longer than I meant to. My face was tired, but not defeated. My eyes carried everything and nothing. And for the first time, I didn't flinch. That weekend, I took a trip, just a short one, to a coastal town I'd always meant to visit. I didn't tell anyone. I booked a quiet inn, packed a bag with just clothes, notebooks, and my camera. The sea was cold. The air tasted like salt and possibility. I spent my days walking barefoot, shooting gulls and fishermen, and the curve of boats in morning fog. Each image felt like reclamation. One evening, I met a stranger, not in a storybook way, just a man reading on the boardwalk. We spoke briefly about the weather, the town, the book he held. He didn't ask about my past. I didn't ask about his. We simply talked, then said goodbye, and that was enough. When I returned to the city, I felt different. Not healed, that's a journey, but ready to keep living, even if parts of me were still figuring out how. Ready to write again, not about betrayal, but about becoming. Coming back from the coast felt like returning from another life, not because it had changed me dramatically, but because it had reminded me that I was still capable of joy, of surprise, of silence that didn't ache. I stepped back into the apartment with sun-warmed skin, sandy shoes, and a new rhythm in my chest. The city hadn't changed, but I had. Slightly, subtly, the things that used to sting had become faint echoes. My old apartment no longer felt like a place where everything had ended. It now felt like where something else might begin. The first thing I did was unpack slowly, carefully. I laid out my photos from the trip, printed a few favorites, and hung them above my desk. No one else needed to see them. They weren't for validation or revenge. They were for me, proof that I had gone, that I had breathed in a different air. Then I sat down to write. I hadn't written anything beyond fragments in weeks, but something had shifted. My fingers moved across the keys almost involuntarily. A letter not to him, but to myself. You survived. Not perfectly, not quietly, but wholly, and that's enough. The next few days passed in a blur of motion and stillness. I reorganized the bookshelves, deleted old voicemails. I made a playlist of songs I once loved and let it play on repeat while I cooked pasta late at night, barefoot and humming. One evening, Aline came over with a bottle of red and a proposal. "Let's do a two-woman show," she said. "Your Billboard series. My urban loneliness set. We combine them, contrast them. Two sides of visibility." I hesitated. "You think people still care?" "I think they care more than ever. And I think you care more than you're willing to admit." She was right. We spent the next month curating the exhibit, choosing images, framing moments, pairing mine with hers. In one corner of the gallery, there would be the infamous photo of him and her, grayscale and grainy. Next to it, a shot Aline had taken of a woman sitting alone in a train, looking like she was about to dissolve. The theme wasn't heartbreak. It wasn't betrayal. It was resilience. Opening night was modest. Friends, artists, a few journalists. But the gallery was full. There were tears, laughter, a quiet that settled over certain photos like reverence. A woman I didn't know squeezed my hand and whispered, "Thank you for saying it." After the exhibit closed, we received an invitation from a larger space, a gallery that specialized in emotional realism. They wanted to carry the series into a traveling show. That night, I lay in bed and thought, this started with a secret. Now it's a chorus. But the most surprising part came later. A message from a name I hadn't expected to ever see again. Her, not him, the woman. She didn't apologize. She didn't defend. Her message was simple. I saw the exhibit. I didn't expect grace. I certainly didn't deserve it. But I see you now. I understand. and I'm sorry. I didn't reply, not out of malice, out of peace, because this wasn't about her or him. It was about me reclaiming the pieces they broke and giving myself permission to make something beautiful out of them. The invitation to participate in a traveling gallery exhibition changed everything. It wasn't just about the photos anymore. It was about voice, identity, power. And the strange part was, I hadn't sought any of it. I hadn't planned to become a symbol or a storyteller for other women. I just wanted to scream in a language that didn't require sound. But the scream echoed. The gallery tour would begin in Berlin, then move on to Paris, Amsterdam, and end in New York. The idea of people across continents standing in front of my pain, seeing it, interpreting it, maybe even recognizing parts of themselves in it, filled me with awe and a strange sense of responsibility. I spent days preparing, not just the technical side, printing, framing, selecting, but also the emotional preparation. Revisiting those photos meant revisiting every ache, every hollow moment. But this time, it didn't feel like reopening wounds. It felt like mapping the scar tissue. Aline and I flew to Berlin in early spring. The city was gray and brisk, but it had a clarity to it, like it had lived through destruction and rebuilt itself with discipline. We stayed in a small loft near the river. Every morning, we walked the gallery, coffee in hand, discussing layout, lighting, spacing. The first day of the exhibit was overwhelming. People came slowly at first, trickling in, their footsteps soft against polished concrete floors. But by afternoon, the room filled. I stood off to the side, watching strangers tilt their heads in front of the billboards, linger over the self-portrait, whisper quietly to each other. One woman cried, just stood still, tears sliding down her cheeks, her hand lightly resting on her chest. I approached her, unsure whether to speak. "Thank you," she said before I could say anything, "for putting it into the world, for not hiding." We didn't exchange names. We didn't need to. After Berlin, we spent a week in Amsterdam before the Paris leg began. We wandered canals, visited bookstores, bought old records. I took photos obsessively, not of the exhibit, of life. I filled memory cards with things that had nothing to do with pain. Street musicians, birds taking flight, lovers laughing in the rain. Something in me was shifting. I started writing again, longer pieces, not just notes or reflections. Fiction, mostly. Stories about women who leave, who change, who build entire new worlds out of the pieces left behind by someone else's failure to love them right. Aline encouraged me to share them. "This is the next chapter," she said. The story after the story. Back in Paris, the gallery was much larger, grand, echoing, flooded with natural light. The exhibit here received media attention. Articles were written. Critics called it a quietly radical act of reclamation. I read the reviews but tried not to absorb them. Praise can become as dangerous as criticism if you let it define you. Then came the message. From her, the woman. It arrived in my inbox, and signed but unmistakable. I saw the exhibition. I recognized myself before I recognized him. I have no defense. I want you to know that I left him long before the billboards. Not because I felt guilty, but because I saw who he really was. I'm sorry, not just for what I did, for who I let myself become. I stared at the message for an hour. I didn't respond, not out of hate, out of clarity. Her words couldn't rewrite the story, and they weren't meant to. They were just another fragment, a truth that belonged to someone else. And I had my own now. As the tour neared its end, we returned to New York. The city felt different now. Less like the place where everything began, more like the place where something was waiting to start. I stood in the final gallery one evening, long after the crowd had gone, and looked at the first image I had ever taken for this project. It no longer made me feel sick. It made me feel powerful. The publisher reached out again. She wanted to turn the story into a hybrid, part visual, part narrative, a book that blended essays with images. I said yes. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something that would last. The morning after agreeing to the book project broke, but because I had refused to be defined by it. The city air thick with the scent of rain-washed streets and the distant clatter of morning traffic through my open window. I The narrator sat at my desk, the wood cool under my fingers, the laptop glowing with the publisher's email, a new chapter unfolding. The photo prints on the coast trip, gulls in fog, boats at dawn, hung above, a gallery of my reclaimed life. The journal opened beside me, a record of my rise. Aline's words, the story after the story, echoed, and I felt a surge of liberation. The neon lights outside a fading shadow, the city a canvas for my voice. I sipped tea, the warm herbal scent of comfort, and wrote, the pen scratched a rhythm, step by step, toward a lens I'd turned outward. That afternoon, I met Aline at her studio, the air alive with the click of her camera and the sharp tang of developing chemicals, the wooden floor creaking under our steps. We pored over images, the billboards, my self-portrait, her urban loneliness shots, planning the book's layout, her grin a shield. We laughed about the media buzz, the stranger's tears, the publisher's excitement, her wit a light, the desk a shared space. She suggested a new photo session, capturing my journey, and I agreed, the neon glow seeping through the window, the journal filling with ideas. The evening stretched, the city lights a backdrop, and I clicked my own camera, the shutter release, step by step, toward a liberation framed in light. The next day, I walked the city alone, the air fresh with the scent of blooming trees and the hum of pedestrians, the pavement a path to my past. I passed the cafe Billboards site, now blank, and felt no sting, the desk a memory of strength, the neon lights a distant echo. A man nodded, recognizing the series' aura, and I smiled, the journal a witness to my growth. At home, I edited photos, city reflections, my shadow and sunlight, each click of victory, the clutter a haven, step by step, tore a lens that freed me from pain. That evening, I joined Aline for dinner, the air warm with the scent of garlic and the soft hum of her balcony breeze, the city sprawling below. We toasted to the book, her toast a bomb, to your voice, and I felt a shift, the desk a refuge, the journal a record of my rise. The neon lights twinkled, a promise of connection, and I wrote late, the pen scratched a heartbeat, step by step, toward liberation that shaped my future. The next morning, I shot my first public portrait, the air crisp with the scent of dawn, the city a stage for my lens. A woman smiled, unaware of my story, and I captured her joy, the desk a memory of art, the neon glow a beacon, the journal filled with dreams, travel, creation, a life my own, step by step, toward a liberation that turned scars into strength. The morning after the portrait session dawned with gentle breeze, the city air carrying the faint scent of coffee and the soft hum of waking streets through my window. The narrator, sat at my desk, the wood warm under my hands, the laptop humming with the book's draft, a tapestry of my resilience. The coastal prints glowed above, a testament to my reclaimed joy. The journal opened beside me, a chronicle of my journey. Aline's nudge, the next chapter, lingered, and I felt a pull toward connection, the neon lights outside a softening glow, the city a mirror to my heart. I sipped tea, the earthy warmth of ritual, and wrote, the pen scratched a pulse, step by step, toward echoes I'd embrace. That afternoon, I met a writer, Elias, at a cafe, the air thick with the aroma of roasted beans and the clink of cups, the wooden table a new space. He'd read the series articles, his eyes curious, and we talked about art, Betrayal, the book, his quiet depth of surprise. We laughed about the media's guesses, the desk of memory of strength, the neon lights a backdrop. He suggested a collaboration, his voice a spark, and I nodded, the journal filling with plans, step by step, toward a connection beyond pain. The next day, I worked with Aline and Elias, the studio buzzing with the click of her camera and the rustle of his notes, the wooden floor shared stage. We blended photos with prose, my billboards, his reflections, her wit and his insight of harmony. The evening stretched, the city lights a canvas, and I wrote, the pen scratched a release, the desk a sanctuary, step by step, toward echoes of a new community. That evening, Elias joined us for dinner, the air warm with the scent of curry and the hum of Aline's balcony, the city sprawling below. We shared stories, his divorce, my journey, her growth, his smile of comfort, the journal witness. The neon lights twinkled, a promise of bond, and I photographed them, the shudder of victory, step by step, toward a connection that healed. The next morning I jogged, the air crisp with the scent of wet leaves, the city a rhythm of let go. I met Elias after, his camera partner, and we shot the skyline, his hand brushing mine. A question. I smiled, the journal filling with dreams, art, friendship, love, step by step, toward echoes that shaped my future. The morning after the skyline shoot broke with a radiant calm, the city air alive with the scent of blooming gardens and the gentle hum of traffic through my window. I, the narrator, stood at my desk, the wood warm under my palms, the book draft nearing completion, a monument to my rise. The coastal prints and new skyline shots hung above, a gallery of my joy. The journal opened beside me, a record of my journey. Elias's touch lingered, a promise of love, and I felt profound hope. The neon lights outside a fading echo, the city a witness to my tomorrow. I sipped coffee, the bitter warmth of ritual, and wrote, the pen scratch a heartbeat, step by step, toward a canvas I'd paint anew. That afternoon, I finalized the book with Aline and Elias. The studio buzzed with the click of her camera and the shuffle of his pages, the wooden floor creative haven. We reviewed the layout, billboards, prose, my self-portrait, her laughter and his inside a symphony, the desk a shared triumph. The publisher called. The exhibit tour extended to Tokyo, and I exhaled, the neon glow seeping through, the journal filling with dreams. The evening stretched, the city lights a backdrop, and I sketched, the pen scratch a release, step by step, toward a tomorrow shaped by art. The next day, the book launched. The gallery air thick with the scent of ink and the murmur of guests, the wooden floor echoing with footsteps. Elias stood beside me, his hand in mine, and we greeted admirers, the desk a memory of strength, the city lights a promise. A woman thanked me, tears in her eyes, and I nodded, the journal a witness, step by step, toward a canvas of shared healing. That evening, Elias and I walked the city, the air crisp with the scent of rain, the neon lights a guide. We talked about love, the book, our future, his kiss a seal, the desk a refuge in my mind. At home, I wrote, the journal a record of my rise, the clutter a haven, step by step, toward a tomorrow of love. The next morning, I jogged, the rhythm a mantra. Let go, passing the cafe with a smile, the city a horizon of peace. Elias joined me, his camera capturing our joy, and I felt whole, the journal filling with life my own, step by step, toward a canvas of tomorrow where I thrived.